Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them. Hello Weirdos! Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. This is Diogo Nogueira, and today's guest is a very, very special guest. I even fan out a little bit. I'm talking about Joseph Goodman, the Dark Lord himself, founder of Goodman Games, creator of DCC RPG, Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is a formative game in my game design, in the way I see fantasy. But anyway, before we get into that, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast, leave us a review, tell others what you think about the show. It really helps the show a lot when people do that. And if you can support the show, also spreading the word about it, talk to your friends, to your gaming group, to your neighbors, I don't know. And if you have any coins left from your last adventure, we do have some links where you can pay us a coffee or buy one of my books to support the show and keep this going. And now talking about my chat with Joseph Goodman, we talk about his journey through the tabletop RPG industry, about the games he made, about he sees more himself as a business person than a game designer, and I tried to convince him otherwise and talk to him about how he even made the business side, of the RPG of DCC kind of a game, with the road crew, with all these rewards, these awards. He's an excellent game designer in my opinion. We talked about how important DCC was for me. We talked about the Appendix N and how he discovered it late in his life, and how I too discovered it in my life. And it's really a transformative view in fantasy. And he now talks about the Appendix 2000 that he's studying in Goodman Games, about how to bring a new view of fantasy that the new generation is having, and how maybe to get into gaming with that. It's a very interesting conversation. We talk about parenthood, we talk about nature as inspiration, especially the time he spent riding on the beach, so we'll talk a little bit about that. It's a fantastic show. I hope you like it just as much as I did, which I loved it. So let's get weird with Joseph Goodman. Hi Joseph, welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. It's so good to have you here. I don't know if you know, but DCC is one of the most mentioned games we talk about here, because for me it's one of the embodiments of the weird, and this is what the podcast is all about. So how have you been, my friend?
Pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. How about you, Diogo? How are you?
I'm good. We're talking a little bit, some change in the day job, so I'm kind of anxious, but I'm dealing with it. People are cool in the new sector, so I'm getting used to it. So Joseph, so the wonderful weirdos out there who maybe they live under a rock or inside of a cave in Primal Quest, and they don't know who Joseph Goodman is, don't know who is the Dark Lord or something like this. But I always love to ask the guests here, instead of reading a bio, so who is Joseph Goodman? What is that you do? And if you can, share just a small, maybe weird detail about yourself, maybe the way you choose your glasses, or maybe the way you do coffee, or how you wake up every day in a routine you have, or anything like this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So short version is, my name is Joseph Goodman. I own Goodman Games, which has been in business now for over 20 years, some big number that I can't count to anymore. And to answer your question about a weird detail, I'm going to give you a couple options here. The first weird detail is that I spent more than 20 years in corporate America, having very corporate jobs, working with people who I was a little weird to them, but I was kind of normal. And so I think I've done a good job of being undercover amongst the muggles, and they never quite knew who I really was.
Yeah.
It's funny how much can happen in your own head that makes you weird, that doesn't necessarily have to come out. And then when you speak with people who appreciate the same things you appreciate, you're able to share that. I think what makes me weird? So a hobby that I've enjoyed recently, and I'll send you photos later that you can maybe overlay on the podcast, but have you ever used a blacklight to hunt insects at night?
No.
So you may not know this. but scorpions are bioluminescent, which means their carapace reflects blacklight, as are millipedes and certain other kinds of insects. So when my older son was in the
Wow.
Cub Scouts, we got into night hikes, and then from night hikes we got into blacklight hikes at night. And so what I discovered is my backyard is filled with scorpions, because if you go outside with a black light, and it's certain times of year when they're more prevalent, but
Mm-hmm.
they, under normal circumstances, you can't see them. They're dark. They look like dirt. They hide. But if you go out with a black
Yeah.
light, they literally glow in the dark. I'll
Wow.
send you photos. So we have since discovered several locations, near my house, where, including my backyard, where at certain times of year you can find not like one or two, but like dozens of scorpions or dozens of millipedes. So something I enjoy doing now is I still like going camping with my boys and going outside and hanging out with the Cub Scouts, but now we also look for really creepy bugs using special black lights, and it's surprising how often we find cool stuff out there.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That reminds me, I once saw like a documentary about colors of nature, and they were focusing about these hidden colors that we can see that with black light, or they show so many how animals, insects, they use color to the bioluminescence to rituals to attract mates or to
Yeah.
locate one another. It's really really impressive. And have you ever, in one of those night hikes, realized you have been, surrounded by scorpions around, or like too many, or something like this?
Yeah, the millipedes are more common. The scorpions we'll find some of, but there's like a creek near my, like, not near my house, but a couple miles from my house. And if you go there at certain times of year, with a regular flashlight, you don't see them because they're dirt colored.
Yeah.
You turn on the flashlight, and there are literally hundreds of them all around. So like right by your foot, you'll see like five.
Yeah.
And your comment on the colors reminds me, I have a book still in my library. Many years ago, this scientist published a book where he took like 50 or 100 examples of each bug. And his point was that we look at a scorpion or a beetle and we say they're all the same. But, just
Oh
like if
yeah.
a beetle looked at us humans, they'd say they're all the same. But we actually see the
Oh yeah.
differences. And so in this book, he photographed like 20 examples of the same beetle and 20 examples of the same like
Wow.
butterfly. And when you see them all side by side, they're all different. They have like slightly different proportions. The legs are longer, or the antennae are longer, or one of them's kind of funny looking. It
Yeah.
was just really cool realizing that, even among these species, and I can't
Yeah.
tell the difference between one beetle and the next, but when you lay them all side by
Yeah.
side, they all do look a little different.
Yeah, yeah, and probably there's like beetles looking in another beetle. Oh, that beetle is hot.
It's a good
They
looking beetle,
probably,
man.
yeah, they're like,
I
wow,
know.
you look good, looking good. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because for them cats, right? Like I had 6 cats. Now I have 3. They're all black cats, and some people are like, oh, how do you tell them apart? But for us, like we see them, like just looking at their faces, we see so many difference, like the proportions,
Yeah.
uh, their mustaches, all this those things are like a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Joseph, you talked about owning Goodman Games, which does a lot of stuff, but you also the main game designer of Dungeon Crawl Classics too, right? Which is maybe the main product of Goodman Games, and certainly a game that has a very special place in my heart that made me see fantasy in a very different way and continues to inspire me until this day. I think you can read this, DCC several times and keep finding things I want to explore in it, and how you're already owner of Goodman Games, like you are founder of Goodman Games. How was this progress of finding this game and embarking and making this like the main thing of Goodman Games, as because you were doing like adventures for D&D, you had like other games being published too. I remember Eldritch, or was
Yeah.
being
Way back
published.
when. Yeah.
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 Lots of other products that wasn't, you didn't have maybe a main line, a main game, right? You had several games. How did you decide to make this bet and going with DCC?
Yeah. Good question. Something that not everybody may know is that I did write DCC RPG, but I'd done a lot of stuff before then, not all of which was as popular. So the first
Mm-hmm.
product from Goodman Games was a game called Dinosaur Planet, which I wrote 25 years ago or something. And it's still out there being sold as PDF. And that was a campaign setting I had involving dinosaurs on an alien planet during the Civil War, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
And then maybe 5 years after that, I got really interested. I eventually published it, a setting called DragonMech that was based on this idea of kind of steampunk mechs, but they were
Mm-hmm.
city-sized on kind of a post-apocalyptic world where people were effectively living inside these city-sized mechs. Um, and there's a lot more to it, but that was great. And that was an ongoing campaign that I ran for, I want to say, a year or two when I lived in Atlanta, and then eventually published that as a book. So I've always been interested in.
Were you one of the authors of DragonMech too?
I was the author of DragonMech.
Oh
yes.
yeah, oh yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
cool.
We employed some freelance writers as well for some of the supplements, but the core book was, I think I wrote all of it or almost all of it, and it was based on. If you've been to Gen Con, you might have met my old friend Alan Fishman or Garrick Andrus, who was there 2 years ago, but they were part of that campaign years ago. So yeah, so I did a couple things, and then I got really interested in, or I've always been really interested in dungeon crawls, and was so I wrote a number of in the DCC RPG adventure line. So Dungeon Crawl Classics number 3 is called The Mysterious Tower, which is one that I wrote, and I can't even remember. I feel like I might have written a couple others, or maybe they never got published. I can't remember. But I wrote little adventures along the way, and I was just really interested. I've always loved dungeon crawls. As for DCC RPG, it came about in part as a reaction to D&D 4th edition. I have to tell you that as somebody, I sometimes get called a game designer. I think I'm more of a business person or businessman, but people call me a game designer, and I hate reading rule books. I hate reading when I buy a board game. I hate reading the rules. When RPG rule books bore me. They just bore me. I can't get through them. So part of the reason DCC RPG is written the way it is because I wanted to write something that read more entertaining, and was the kind of thing that I wanted to read. And so as I give you the short version, then you can dive in because I don't want to ramble for too long. But short version is D&D 3rd edition came along. A lot of people liked it. It managed to, I think, sort of rebuild the D&D community that had kind of fallen off the wagon after 2nd edition. I liked D&D 3rd edition well enough, but I cut corners on the rules. It was too complicated and too much of a tactical war game for me, so I simplified a lot of stuff. But I could live with it. But then when 4th edition came out, I couldn't live with it. Like I just did not like 4th edition personally. Goodman Games was actually the very first company to publish D&D 4th edition compatible material, other than Wizards of the Coast, of course. So that very first Gen Con where it was an option to do that, we published them. I think we've published under like every license that Wizards of the Coast has offered, including the GSL, which was the license everybody disliked back then. But when 4th edition came out, I just couldn't get into it. So for my own campaigns, I just had a really hard time running them under 4th edition. So I started looking for something else. And that journey coincided with, I went on a trip with some Goodman Games colleagues and friends, and they started talking about classic fiction. And it turns out I had not read much of what they liked. I hadn't read Elric at that point. I hadn't read Lankmar at that point. I hadn't read this, that, or the other. And I'd read some things, but just not much of the classic fiction. And I still remember that trip. I believe it was in 2009, I want to say, where we went to now they have a different name for it. I think now they call it Winter Fantasy, but it's that con they run in like January up in it. Or it's a big RPGA con. And back then they let you have vendor booths. So we were selling D&D 4th edition products. And I remember visiting the stores with these guys and talking about classic fiction. I kept thinking, I got to read that. I got to read that. So in sort of the 4th edition era, I started reading deep into D&D fiction. And that's when I discovered Appendix N. And this was all before the OSR. The OSR came later, but I was, anyway, slightly ahead of my time in terms of reading all this classic fiction. And that coincided with me not enjoying 4th edition and thinking about creating my own game because I needed something to play. And that was the early beginnings of what would become DCC RPG.
Yeah, amazing. I remember going through something similar and finding out about DCC. You know, I had stopped playing during college, and I was coming back around 2010, 11, and I played 4th edition. I was the first time I had money because I had a real job now out of college. And I'm going to buy all these D&D books. And I bought everything. And reading them, I was in another city, reading them. They felt really well thought out. It was, really, very balanced. All the math, everything seemed to click. And I thought, this is going to be great. And I sat down to play when I moved back to Rio. Sat down to play with my friends, and like I played a 1 year campaign, 1 year weekly campaign, and we couldn't finish 3 adventures. Because every little thing, like, oh, this is gonna be a quick ambush. 4 hours goes by, and I after a year said no, I have to find something else. I can't. This isn't what I remember it was, and then I found out it was 2012. I saw the playtest of DCC, and I ordered the black leather one with Doom of Savage Kings, and I felt instantly in love. And I found about Appendix N, through DCC, and I made that jump that you made to create it. And what I say here is like DCC made me see fantasy could be so much more than D&D and Lord of the Rings, and I owe it to you and to DCC and to the community to show how we can explore that in very creative ways. And you said you're not a game designer, you're more a business person, but you managed to gamify the business part. You managed to make running games fun, and you get things, you get points. You are a game designer, and you think about gaming in the business, and it's very well done, by the way. Very, very well done.
Thank you. So, it's interesting hearing you say that, because game designers often have very strong opinions on what's right and wrong about a game design. I was actually I won't say the name, but I was just talking to another designer. We had lunch last week, and he has a game that I love. Like, it's a card game, and my copy is like torn to shreds because I have played it probably 1,000 times with my friends, my brother, my boys. I think it's a great game. Like, it's so much fun. And it's one of his least favorite games that he ever published. And then he told me in detail why he doesn't like it, because it violates some principle of game design. I was like, who cares, man? It's like so much fun. And so for me, I think there's this like abstract, science of game design and all this stuff. And I just ignore it all because I kind of feel like if it's fun, it's great. And I look at Monopoly, and every it's like a secret code among game designers that you have to look down on Monopoly, like, you roll 2d6 and there's all these problems with it. But like, that game has been popular forever, and it continues to be so popular. And there's something about it is just inherently fun. I can't pretend to know what, but I always tell people, like, I follow the Monopoly design procedure, which you can have a crappy board game where you roll 2d6 and do all the most basic stuff. And yet my kids will play that every single time. And frankly, I still think it's kind of fun, at least for the first hour. Once everybody owns the properties, then it gets really boring. But so I feel at DCC, I agree with you. 4th edition on paper was like a beautiful math exercise. Like, everything was perfectly balanced, but it was so tedious to play. And so with DCC, I frequently, if you do the math underlying some of the tables, you'll find the math is often broken. Like, it'll work up to a certain point, then it just breaks and the formula changes. Because there were places where we just said, this is getting boring. Let's just change it. And so I did that, and I was playing a lot with Doug Kovacs at the time, and Harley was kind of a thought partner on a lot of it. And there were we did dozens and dozens and dozens of play tests, and I also had a regular gaming group in San Diego at the time. So like, there was just lots of places where there was a theory and then actual gameplay. We decided, let's just do something different. Even the dice, like the dice chain, mathematically, as you progress the dice chain, you go from a 3 to a 5 to a 7. But then later on, you go from like a 14, 16, 20, 24, 30, like the leaps become bigger, which mathematically is not quite right, but they're freaking cool dice, so why not?
But it makes more stream too, so it makes more attractive too, even though not necessarily has to be about math, but it has to be about vibes too. And DCC is a game that's explore vibes in a very good way, And we're talking about the weird, like you explore it on the art, you explore it having very different artists tackling sometimes the same adventure in the same setting, and you can see how everybody can imagine the same thing in a very different way. And it kind of makes this parallel with the game table, right? Because you're playing with the same judge, the same adventure, but everyone will certainly be imagining the things in our heads in a different way, and kind of the books reflect that. And
actually, Diogo, that's a great observation. I agree with you. I would often give very little direction to artists, and in some cases have them illustrate the same words, from the adventure, and not come back and say, well, the other artist, whatever, he's got cloven hooves, and your depiction doesn't have cloven hooves. It's okay. I agree. There should be like creativity is about variability, but this goes back to in third edition, Goodman Games published a book called The Complete Guide to Drow, and this was I don't know 15 years ago, and I still remember
Mm-hmm.
we did it with two versions of the cover art. The original version of the cover art had some drow that were not standard drow, and I remember reading online reviews and somebody was like, "Oh, they don't even look like drow," and I'm like, "Drow are made up, man. Like, how do you tell me what a drow looks like?" And that's when I
Yeah.
started thinking a lot about how there were all these conceptions of fantasy, quote unquote fantasy, fantastic that creative worlds beyond our imagination, and yet they've become so typified and standardized, in a little
Yeah.
box. And so your dragon has to look like a dragon, or else it's not a dragon, even though dragons don't
Yeah.
exist. And that's where I started getting to this place, like in DCC. There's a lot of like random generation of visual attributes and things like that, where things don't have. I want things that break the visual norm and expose people to the sense of wonder and mystery and awe that we all felt when we remember when you first fought a skeleton like in
Yeah.
the Caves of Chaos, and you were like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, is it going to kill me? I don't know what it's going to do." Like I want DCC to be like that every single time, where you're never quite sure the
Yeah.
outcome of this
Yeah.
encounter.
Yeah, and another great example of how of a great game designer you are. You also you make that in your art, you make that in the themes of adventures, and you make that in the dice too. You introduce new weird
Yes.
dice, so you can have this feeling again, which is amazing. And until this day, I love taking this CC to places and people play with the dice, and I always invent excuses to use them. Like if I find a weird short sword, you use
Yes.
a D7 because
That's great.
why not? Right? We have it there. Why not? That's also a great zine idea. Make a zine just about new uses for weird dice. Just make
Yeah.
stuff up because we have there. Let's play with them. And then I talk here about seeing game design and rules as toys, and you took that and made the dice as toys, so people can play with it. The dice chain. So instead of just using boring modifiers, they're like, no, just go one dice up, one dice down, and if you depends on the result of your spell, we roll different dice too. That's a great way to explore the rules as toys.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of interesting points. So many, many years ago, we published a book called 50 Fantastic Functions for the D50. And that in part originated, I worked with Luzaki for many years. He provided dice and he was just a fun guy. And I'd go say hi to him at all the cons. And he ended up with a container load of D50s. I mean, like thousands and thousands of 50-sided dice. And it was this crazy long story that involved I only half remember the story, but it was like some guy was going to make something for the lottery somewhere. Like the lottery was going to get approved in some state, and the lottery was going to have some sort of 50-sided or choice of 50 something. The guy made a lot of 50-sided dice. He was going to use it with the lottery. So like you roll the die to pick your lottery numbers or something. And he made the dice, but then the state legislature didn't approve the lottery, so he ended up with like 1,050-sided dice and no way to sell them. So Luzaki bought all the dice from him for like super cheap. And then like years later at con, he's like, "Hey, Joseph, I got like 1,050-siders. Can you do anything with that?" So that's how we wound up publishing this book. But it was just like fun, and at that time I couldn't really work a D50 into DCC, but I've always enjoyed these odd dice. And Luzaki had these 7-siders. I still have some in my collection, which are just weird looking.
yeah.
And I remember, that were like the orange and the green
The
one.
black
and I was
ones.
like,
Yeah.
yes. I was like, there's no way this is mathematically even, But I don't know if we published an interview with Luzaki in one of our yearbooks, and he is like the most entertaining person on earth. But he was in the dice business in like the 1970s and 1980s when there were no computers. You couldn't design anything on a CAD. It was all just like physically sculpting stuff with clay. And he used to argue that you should buy his dice over Cheswick's dice because his dice were precision dice and mathematically more even. So he told me, and he had like thousands of results of people rolling his dice and proving it was a bell curve. The way he got these results was every time he went to a convention and he was on the airplane, they have those little fold down trays on the airplane that you put your like food on. He would fold down the tray and then he'd start talking to the people next to him, and he'd say, "Hey, listen, I manufacture dice for a living. Could you do me a favor? Could you roll this dice 500 times on this flight and write down the results for me?" And so he would have everybody around him on the plane rolling dice, and he'd give some of them his dice and some of them Cheswick's dice and have them write down the results. Then when he got home, he'd tally the results and make these little bell curves. And that's how he got his data showing that his dice were more accurate, rolled more precisely, and so on. But yeah, just working with him over the years, he's an inspiring person. He had all these crazy dice, and I just wanted to work them in somehow to what I was doing.
Yeah. I have with that book. It was a Kickstarter, right? I have
Yeah,
the
a long time
50
ago. Yeah,
here. Yeah.
yeah,
Joseph, one of the themes in the podcast is the weird, and we kind of have this positive view of it, like weird is the new wonderful. And Goodman Games is explore this a lot, and I wanted to ask you if you could try to define what is weird for you. How would you define it, and how do you seek that in the way you do your work, and maybe outside of your work in your life? Do you seek weird experiences, weird events, and things like this?
good question. I have found I don't know what weird means. To me, it's just normal. There's certain things that I do that just come naturally to me. What I've learned over the years is that some of the things I pursue aren't necessarily pursued by other people. And so I wind up in situations where I am the only one in the room to have done a certain thing or experienced a certain thing. I live near a mountain called Mount Tamalpais. It's a great mountain. There's lots of hiking trails. And on the side of this mountain is a crashed military jet. It crashed there in the 1940s and blew up. There's a huge fireball. It killed, I think, the 8 soldiers who were on board. And then the government showed up and hauled off the wreckage under secret conditions. So there's a lot of speculation that it had something secret on it. And so now all that's left is like just wreckage. It's like a junkyard. It's like what's left is just a bunch of metal junk in the middle of the woods. But to get to it, it's not on maps. To get to it, you have to know where it is. You have to hike for like 2 hours. You get to a certain point, which is a dry stream bed, and you have to know it's the 3rd deer trail on the right. Sometimes it's the 2nd deer trail on the right because the deers make new trails. But there's a certain point where you have to know to basically go off trail and go downhill for like 100 yards and you can find it. So I've done this. I actually did this hike with Doug years ago, but I've done this hike like a half dozen times. In Mount Tamalpais, like everybody here goes hiking or mountain biking there. Like everybody here has been to this mountain, and yet nobody seems to know about this crashed airplane except for me. I've done this hike many times.
Yeah.
I was just at a group at a school event with my kids' school, hanging out with a bunch of other dads, and like none of them, they've all been to Mount Tam, they've all hiked and biked it. None of them have ever heard of this trail or gone to it. And to me, that's weird to me. Like, why am I the only person in the room who knows about this trail and has done this hike like a half dozen times? And it's like kind of, it's not super hard to learn about it. Like if you just Google Mount Tam hikes, like it'll come up.
Oh,
so
yeah.
to me, that I don't know what it is about me that winds up being attracted to these things. Like there's also here near where I live, there's a nuclear missile silo, which is now open to the public. So it's called it's called SF-88, Nike nuclear missiles. It was a style of nuclear missile designed to shoot down Russian bombers. They didn't use it to bomb cities. The idea was that if the Soviet Union ever invaded, they would fly their airplanes across the Bering Straits to Alaska, then come down the U.S. West Coast. They bomb Seattle, then they bomb Sacramento, then they bomb San Francisco, and they basically send a fleet of like a bunch of bombers dropping nuclear bombs on America. So the U.S. designed this defensive thing called the Nike nuclear missile. It blows up. It blows up a nuke in the air, and so it can then take out like 100 airplanes at once. That's the basic concept.
Wow. Yeah.
And so every U.S. city, you Google this, you find the maps, has some number of Nike nuclear missile sites hidden around it. Like it used to be confidential, now it's public knowledge. So like 5 or 10. San Francisco has I think 7 or 8. And then many years ago, they decommissioned them. So they took all the hardware out and just filled them with cement. So now they're just like cement holes in the ground. But there's one site in San Francisco that they didn't destroy, and instead they handed it over to the National Park Service, and the National Park Service restored it. And you can actually go to this nuclear missile site, and it's open to the public. I've taken some of the Goodman Games crew there before, and it's crazy because it looks like a parking lot. Wow. It's on the top of a mountain, and it just looks like a parking lot surrounded by barbed wire with a couple of those like military huts. But they opened a door on the ground. It's like a door on the ground, and you march. It's like going into a dungeon. You march down this staircase into the ground, and then you suddenly get into this huge underground chamber, and there's 7 nuclear missiles, and they're horizontal on racks, and the racks can like move left and right. And when I went there, the park ranger demonstrated this for us. He hits this giant red button on the wall, and it goes rah, 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 like in a movie. And then the doors opens, the whole parking lot like opens to the sky, and then the missile rises up on its hydraulics, and then they can aim it. And then he gives this whole explanation as to why it actually technically aims at 87 degrees instead of 90 degrees, because at 90 degrees it would fall right back down on you and blah, blah, blah. And all the missiles are, obviously there's no warheads anymore. There's no propulsion. They're just shells. Anyway, I think this place is super cool. And it's like open to the public. It's around here. You just have to Google it. You can go see it. And yet somehow I'm the only person I know who's gone to see this. Like nobody else goes to see this stuff. So to answer your question, weird to me is just like, I think the world is full of interesting places and, borderline fantasy sci-fi experiences in the real world that are out there. And for some reason I seem to find these experiences and other people
you look for them.
don't necessarily. Yeah, I don't know if I look for them or they just like somehow I'm like a magnet for this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what weird is. Weird to me is it's just the things I happen to be attracted to somehow aren't necessarily always other people aren't attracted to them, and so that I guess makes me weird. But but to me it's interesting and fascinating, and it makes the world a lively, exciting place full of wonder and possibility, and that's the part that I like.
For sure. And some people talk about projecting, you attract stuff, but see, I think it's just you pay more attention to it. Since it's something you are interested, you pay more attention to it and you see it more and you seek it more, and it seems like you're attracting it. It has always been there, like you said. It has always been there. No one goes there because no one seeks. No one. You're a weirdo. You like RPGs. You kind of do. This is kind of an adventure quest. Like, oh, I'm gonna go this weird site, these ruins that has this happen, and you go out there and you seek it. And some people don't. Some people just go over their daily lives. Like they go to the mountains. They will do the most obvious trail, the one that's first available. And that's something you really have to dig in. And when you're aligned to these ideas, to these things that are attracted, you see them more easily, I think, right? You go out of your way to find them.
Yeah, no, it is going out of, or hearing about it, then following up on it, then making a point of seeing it. But it's interesting hearing you say this because I've Goodman Games for a long time was a small company with me and a handful of people, and now it's getting bigger and bigger, and we have other people who work for Goodman Games to both write and illustrate and do graphic design, as well as things like work in the warehouse to ship product and list our products online and so on. And so I've been thinking about doing a motto or a mission statement for Goodman Games. And you always hear about these corporate mottos like, we will strive to pursue excellence in everything we do, continuous improvement. And that is, those are all great, but that's not what I think defines Goodman Games. So I'm going to read you. It's funny you brought this up. I'm going to read you our current draft of our company motto. And some of the staff has heard this and some of them have not. So you're going to be the world premiere. And we're eventually going to put this on the website, but it includes some of the stuff you're talking about. So let me look at my other monitor here. We're no heroes.
Exclusive. Yeah.
Exclusive. Yes. So here's our draft for our company motto. Mm-hmm. We're no heroes. We are writers and artists, rebels and readers, sci-fi geeks and skate punks, daydreamers and dungeon crawlers, the weird kids who didn't fit in. We create the games we want to play, and all are welcome. Join us.
Amazing.
And I think
I love it.
To your point, good. you're our current test subject. So, but it does feel like somehow we are the weird kids who didn't quite find the other weird kids until now, and now we've all found each other.
Yeah. And this rings so true to me. The first time I went to Gen Con, it was 2014. I haven't published anything. I didn't know anyone. And I arrived there, and the DCC community just invited me. Oh, come on over. Come here at the bar, sit with us, play a game. And I felt part of a family. And, when I had a kid, some of the people I played with DCC, they send me gifts from all over there. They have always been present. We have, we write to each other, send letters, and it's an amazing game and an amazing community. It's really that everything that you said there. It's I think it will bring out some tears of happiness of a lot of people when they see this. I think
that's great. Yeah, it's interesting to me how we all have shared experiences that are all slightly different, but something about them is close enough that we can all connect.
Yeah. And do you think RPGs in themselves are something weird, and it's something? And what would be your favorite thing about role-playing games?
Oh, yeah. Those are two questions, so I'll answer them separately.
Yeah.
Our RPG's
Yeah.
weird. It's funny. I've always my dream is to someday open a game store, maybe more than one game store. And I've always wanted to have basically, you know that TV show Cheers, the American TV show.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a
Yeah.
bar. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows your name.
Knows your
That's
name,
kind of
yeah.
what I want in a game store, just to hang out, you know. And I think the best game stores have that feeling where you can just go hang out there. Um,
Yeah.
in the area I live in, there's a comic book store that really feels like that. The game store doesn't feel like that. It's just they sell plenty of games. They're a competent game store, but they don't have that feeling. So I was talking to a friend of mine about that idea of opening a game store someday, and he said he phrased it. There's a ton of people who play D&D now, and it's become very mainstream. And he made an interesting observation, whereas he said the true gamers are not comfortable around the beautiful people, and he called it the beautiful people. But when you look at the guest list now for certain conventions, they have all these celebrities. It's the beautiful people, and that is a
Yeah.
very different audience than what I'd call core gamers. I played D&D when it made me weird and abnormal. A lot of these beautiful people, if D&D goes back into the the downturn, they might stop playing D&D, whereas I'll probably still be playing. So I think there's something about nowadays D&D is not weird, but therefore it is more acceptable, and so it is I have no complaints about all my wonderful customers who have come and found this. But at the same time, I think that some of us will always be playing these games because we are truly interested in them, regardless of the current social norms. Um,
Yeah.
re-
I
yeah,
get that. I get that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. There's an interesting contrast in this, like in Gary Cohn, like seeing all those models and actors and there and like everybody else, and they already kind of separate. They have special rooms for them. There's already kind of this division anyway, So it, and even though it's D&D, right? So there's other games like DCC and the indie games, which is mostly what I talk about here anyway.
yeah.
I haven't played DCC since fourth edition, but it is a refuge for the weird, for the ones that wanna maybe seek something different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
a
think
it's a
you're,
community of weirdos that welcome each other. Like, yeah, you don't fit there, don't worry. Here, everybody fits in a way, right? I don't know. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a new contrast that is growing that we didn't have before, right? So we're still learning
yes,
how to deal with that. I think. Yeah.
yeah. And somebody once, there's a phrase I like, which was somebody I knew who used, I don't remember how this came up, but they would say, "You do you," and I've always liked that phrase, "You do you,"
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you don't have to do somebody else, you don't have to do a certain way, you do you.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the essence of the word is this authenticity and just being you, unashamed of what other people will think. And
Yeah.
Joseph, uh, when you work on your craft, on your writing, on your art, do you have any kind of ritual, any kind of practice that maybe helps you get into the mood of what you're doing, or do you follow a strict routine or time schedule? You put your working shoes on.
Yeah.
How is your working day normally?
Yeah, good question. And I should say, going back to this idea of game designer versus business person, I these days I have a staff that does a lot of the creative side. So I don't spend nearly as much time on the creative side, but I rely on, Michael Curtis and Chris Doyle and Matt Hildebrandt, and then of course other folks like, Harley Stroh and Doug Kovacs and Stefan Pogue and Brendan LaSalle and a wide group of people who I think do a great job of carrying forward the vision of Goodman Games. Part of the reason I wanted to do a company motto is that I work with a number of people who I have a personal relationship with, and I've known most of them for like 10 or 15 or 20 years. And so we all understand what Goodman Games should feel like. But as the company grows, I need some way to explain to other people what that means, especially as we perhaps
Mm-hmm.
hire staff who have only worked, have only just learned about us or only worked here for a year or two and so on. Um, so my routine is not a creative routine these days. It's more of a management routine. But in the olden days, when I spent more time writing, a lot of DCC RPG was written on a beach in San Diego. I lived in San Diego, and at that time, I did not have kids. And as you know, Diogo, having children takes a lot of time. So nowadays, a lot of I like my kids. I spend a lot of time with them, And
Yeah.
lately we've been playing a lot of shoots and ladders, because that's the age my younger son is at. So there are times in life where you have more time to do one thing or the other. I'm very happy being a father, and this is a great time in my life. But one thing that I don't have as much now is, solitude and time for reflection. But the time I was writing DCC
Yeah.
RPG, I didn't have kids, and I did have a lot more of that time. So I still read a lot. I just, that was the time when I was reading basically all of Appendix N. Um, and so what I would do is, because it is a great beach, La Jolla Beach, if you happen to know it, but it's very calm. It's like wide open sandy beach, and there's actually lots of people there, but it's like huge. So it never feels crowded. And so I would go there usually in the morning. San Diego is great because it's foggy till 10 a.m. Then the fog like burns off like clockwork. So at like 10:01, it always turns sunny. So I would go
Mm-hmm.
there with a little beach chair and my laptop and just write usually for an hour or two. And then when I wasn't actively writing on my laptop, I carried notebooks around. I still have all these notebooks with like random, I just scribble stuff. And then once I was sitting down, I'd actually type it out. Uh,
Yeah.
so for many years, that was my routine, and it was great. So I need a little bit of nature, a little bit of solitude. I guess those are kind of the ingredients.
Yeah, and they are very important ingredients, and sometimes we can have it exactly that, but you can find a little bit of nature, or I think it's about beauty, right?
Yes.
Nature
Yeah.
is the purest form of beauty you can find, but sometimes you can find beauty in a crowded city if you look hard, and
Yes.
solitude and meditation. This kind of thing is very important for ideas, right? And yeah, as a father, that's something very hard to find. That's I think that's why I sleep kind of bad, because I try to wake up early and stay late a little bit
Yes.
after everybody goes to sleep, so I can have these small moments of solitude.
Yes.
Do you
For sure.
miss do you miss working on the creative part more often? Do you do you wish you were working on something specific? Like, do you still have uh, an idea or two would you like to tackle someday?
Uh, Great question. I don't miss it. I feel like uh, there's a lot of ways to keep your brain busy, and there is plenty of stuff to keep my brain busy right
For
now. The
sure.
gaming industry is evolving very rapidly. Crowdfunding had a huge influence, and sort of how you reach your customers. Crowdfunding has had a huge influence, and there's all these layers to that. And right now, even that subset is evolving rapidly as Kickstarter now has competition with BackerKit and other platforms. So I think there's this whole aspect of there's tons of fans out there. Some of them are existing fans. Some of them would love our products if they only were exposed to them. So to me, that process of finding our fans and connecting with our products is always fascinating. Then I think on the other side, the D&D is in a state of evolution and has been for a couple of years now. So I think there's another
Yeah.
side of how do you, you know, let me talk about this other concept I have. Like, uh, D&D has effectively brought, I think, millions of fans into the industry. I mean, millions. It's the most D&D 5th edition is the most effective edition of D&D ever. The designers of this edition get a lot of credit for creating a very popular game, and it has been going now for whatever it's been 9 or 10 years, just steadily pulling new fans into the industry. There was an era at the beginning of DCC RPG when all the people who discovered our game had played first edition D&D or AD&D. They definitely played third edition. And so they were familiar with this common set of references we all had. Like they knew, they didn't necessarily know all of
Yeah.
Appendix N, but they know bits and pieces of it. And there was like this common language we all spoke. And old school to them meant like derived from D&D first edition. Nowadays, we routinely discover fans who are or younger for the most part have only ever played D&D 5th edition, and they have this idea of what old school means, and it does not mean the same thing that old school means to an older audience.
Yeah.
And they Appendix N to them is just a very different thing, because when you think about it, I think Fafner and the Grey Mouser, I love reading their stories, but that stuff has been out of print for decades. I mean, it's kind of sort of available if you look for it, but if you go to a mass market bookstore,
Kindle.
you never can, yeah, but you have to look for
Yeah.
it. You never find it if you go to Barnes and
Oh,
Noble. It's
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
for the casual fan who discovers D&D and just goes to a
That's like
store
the
to see what's out
hike.
there.
That's
Right.
like the
But
hike.
it is like the hike, but these fans are exposed to something else. So what I'm now calling that is Appendix 2000. And this is a word I made up. And I don't know what's
Wow.
on Appendix 2000 yet. Right now I have like 50 titles and I need to narrow it down. But what I'm trying in my head to figure out is what is because Appendix N was basically the set of shared influences that Gary Gygax was exposed to that led to the development of D&D. But at the era he was reading, so he was reading these books in like the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. That was what you like. I remember this story. Jim Ward told me the story of how Jim Ward met Gary Gygax, and they met at the drugstore when Jim Ward was buying Conan novels at the drugstore. Like, I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but in America, they don't sell Conan novels at the drugstore anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no.
So that was a time frame where like the, mass market presented fantasy in a certain way that you could discover at the drugstore. Nowadays, the mass market presents fantasy in a very different way. And what you discover is not Conan. You discover other things. So in my head, there's this idea of what I'm calling Appendix 2000, which is that set of shared influences that modern D&D fans are exposed to, and it's some of it's found at Barnes & Noble, but some of it's found on YouTube, and some of it's found on Twitch, and some of it's found on Facebook, and a lot of it's found in movie theaters and Netflix and other streaming sites, and like what defines fantasy to them. And where I want to go with that is I think there is this place where you can still connect with what is essentially, D&D/DCC to this newer audience. And I want to find that common ground, where we can communicate the language that says we're going to do this really cool kind of fantasy. But instead of saying it's kind of like Conan, but different, we're instead going to say it's kind of like Attack on Titan, but different, and connect with something that's in their world. That was a really long-winded answer, but hopefully that makes sense. But I think there is still space to be very creative, but also in a way that is not just always looking back, but also looking forward and connecting with the newer folks who are entering this segment of the hobby.
I think it's about choice. I still think old stuff can be new, games can be a fun way to discover that, because I didn't live in the Appendix N era, and I found out with DCC, and I love a lot of the stuff there. I know there's some dated stuff with the way society would work and the way some of the authors would think, but there's a lot of the stories that doesn't have that, or there's a lot of more to the stories than that too. But I think it's interesting to explore this Appendix 2000 we're talking about. But I think it's also, as you're saying, you're more a businessman than a game designer, so I think it makes completely sense. But think as game designer, as an artist, I would have very difficult time with this, because that's not the kind of stuff I'm attracted to. So forcing myself to work on that, it's gonna be hard. And my question is how we're gonna join those two things, this Appendix 2000, the way this new fantasy feels, and the way DCC feels. Or is it gonna be a new game, or is it still for DCC? Do you have any ideas how you're gonna make them
plans
feel?
to change DCC. DCC is when I was a kid, I played Warhammer 40,000, and I played in the first edition, and I was there when they changed to the second edition. And I still remember, like you said earlier, when you had no money when you were a kid, I saved up my allowance for like 5 weeks, and I bought the vehicle manual for 40K. And then like 2 weeks later, they announced second edition, and it made my purchase obsolete. And I was so angry because I had saved up my money for so long. So, I don't plan to ever do a second edition or anything like that. I do want to eventually change the layout. Basically, what I call layout standards have changed in the last, it's been like 12 years since we released it. Now there's a lot of people prefer the much simpler layout with sort of assumptions, and 2-page spreads and so on, slightly less dense. And I think there's also room. People get intimidated by the size of the book. It's mostly spell tables. So you can pull out the most important parts into a much slimmer book. So like in a year or two, we might keep what we already have and never change that, but also make a version that's like a different layout or different format. But I don't want to change the rules. But no, Appendix 2000 is not about changing DCC RPG. It's more about, so you just said it would be hard for you to get into these influences. And I had this general rule of thumb, which is if you do anything for 10 years, you need to try something new. Like as a company, you can't stagnate. And so, and as an individual, we all evolve. And if you look back at what you liked when you were younger, you'll discover that what you like now is probably different, and you're the same Giogo. You've changed, and we all changed.
But I like other things. But I mean, this new fantasy, the fantasy like my kid likes, I try, but I don't know. It's weird. It's not something for me. But I like new stuff and explore this new stuff. It's not like I'm gonna make the same game like Sharp Sword and Sinister Spell forever.
Yeah.
I'll explore new things. I made a game about dinosaur space rangers. I'm making a game about small gods with great ambitions and immortals entangled. I'm exploring new stuff, but like this
But
kind of
how old
really
is your
high.
son? Can you remind me how old your
He's
son is?
8 years old. 8.
And so when you were 8, the stuff you watched when you were 8, you probably did go back and rewatch it, but you might not like it as much now, right? You probably couldn't sit there and watch,
Yeah,
or
but
could you sit there and watch the
wow.
same stuff?
I mean, Thundar the Barbarian, this kind of stuff. There's still very good stuff in there.
Yeah.
I still watch. I can still watch. Of course, I don't know if I was 8. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my kids are
a lot of stuff from my childhood are still very dear to me in a way, because it was kind of my refuge. Being
Yes.
autistic, it was like where I would hide from the world in a way. So
Well, and I know
it's
that
like
feeling,
Conan.
but yeah,
Even though Conan has a lot of this misogynistic stuff, it's about the spirit that was behind that, like the adventure, the
Yeah.
discover, the action. So that's what even though maybe some of the plots of the cartoons I would watch was kind of silly, the spirits of the setting and the way the concepts still attract me in a way. So that's maybe what you're seeking with this new Appendix 20, like see what's the essence of these new fantasies and
Right.
seeing how you can work on that with DCC. Is still keeping
you
like
said it
this
well.
weird.
It's still like, yeah, and it may not affect DCC. We may apply it to our 5th edition line. I don't know where it'll
Okay.
go. Right now, we're very much in the early.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be something else. Like I'm not, in my mind, it's not connected to DCC. It is just a thing out there that I need to understand. But as you just said, sometimes it's about the spirit, not about the execution. Other times it's about the sense of wonder. Other times there's just really cool ideas in there,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure.
So I don't know where it'll go. I just feel like there's some way to connect with the modern generation of gamers, which is going to be different than what we did in the past. And to me, that's the kind of creative puzzle right now.
Yeah.
And like, I don't have the time to watch 95 hours of Attack on Titan. Like a lot of these series now, there's so many. Like my kids watch these things, and I'm like, my God, there's a lot of episodes. But like, I want to start understanding it better so I can identify a little bit more with that audience.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great idea. And talking about this, where you seek inspiration, as creators and game designer and business person, you're always seeking ideas and new ways of doing things in a creative way. And as I said, I think you try to gamify the business part of the DCC2, which is fantastic. And what I wanted to ask you, do you identify any place you see drawing ideas a lot from? I draw a lot of my ideas from these things from my childhood that I talked about. I'm always seeking new experiences, but it always kind of goes back to some of the cartoons I would watch or some of the spirits of this whimsical kind of adventure. Do you identify anything, any part of your life you draw a lot from?
Yeah, my childhood's definitely important, like you said. I will say that I went through a phase, let's call it, of what I called Appendix N archaeology. Like when you look at the Appendix N authors, then you realize they had to get their inspiration from somewhere. So there's like Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen and William Hope Hodgson and I'm blanking on his name. The guy who inspired Robert E. Howard. Hold on, I got to look this up. My friend Howard Andrew Jones edited several volumes of his Clit the Barbarian or Clit the Cossack. Howard Lamb, who is, hold on, I got to make sure Harold Lamb. Have you heard of Harold Lamb?
No.
Oh, he's amazing. So he's the guy who inspired Robert E. Howard to create Conan. And he wrote historical fantasy, for lack of a better word, or historical fiction with the tiniest amount of supernatural mixed in back in like the dawn, like before Weird Tales. Weird Tales came along and was the place where Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith and Fritz Leiber and Edgar Rice Burroughs and many other authors came through in like the generation. So that generation was Appendix N. The generation before them is what I call Appendix N archaeology, like who inspired them. And the writing style is so different. The writing style is so archaic to me, it's sometimes hard to get into. But some of these authors are amazing. Anyway, Harold Lamb, if you can find some of his series, they're on Amazon. He's an amazing author, and it's a series called Klit the Cossack, Khlit. He's amazing. But so I went through and then Algernon Blackwood. Have you read The Willows?
No.
It's a short story. Lovecraft cited him as one of Lovecraft's inspirations, which is how I started reading him. But he has a series called The Willows, and it's about these two sort of basically guys going on a camping trip who wind up stranded in the middle of a river on a little sandbar kind of, and then weird stuff starts to happen. Like, it's such a weird story because it doesn't seem in any way dangerous, and then weird stuff happens. So and then what's the other one? Not the Sasquatch. Hold on, I gotta Google it. Not the Sasquatch. Starts with a W and it's a synonym for a Sasquatch. I'm blanking.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to that some later or okay?
The Wendigo. That was it. The Wendigo.
Yeah.
It's another great story by Algernon Blackwood about basically a big hairy monster that sort of stalks some hunters in a kind of like a swampy area. But it's just an amazing story, and it's very moody. It's less about the plot, less about the characters, more about like sort of the moody setting, and this sort of supernatural dread as this creature stalks them in ways they can never imagine. They never get a clear view of it. You never know quite what's going on. But this stuff was written in like 1910, or maybe earlier than that. I don't know, like so far back, and it's like such compelling fiction. So nowadays, like I don't have as much time to read as I'd like. Again, kids, but like this world of not just Appendix N, but before Appendix N, I find fascinating. I kind of alternate that with right now. I'm also reading The Three Body Problem, which is like a great modern series. So I kind of alternate between that pre-Appendix N era and the modern era now in what I read.
Yeah, that's great. You talked about hiking and nature and riding on the beach, and I wanted to ask any of those adventures you have on your hikes in the mountains or anywhere have inspired anything that you wrote or created in your games or adventures, and like maybe what the crash site inspired you to some weird place in anything that you wrote, or the insects you saw at night?
Yeah, definitely. It's not always like a literal adaptation, but I feel like being in these places, it like breaks down the walls around your brain. Like, you just, I think normally when we think, we follow tracks that are set out for us. And a lot of people, if you've watched enough Lord of the Rings, like that's fantasy to you and you think along that track. And I feel like when you go to places that are way outside the boundaries of what's on that track, it doesn't necessarily make me design an adventure about a crashed airplane. But like suddenly my brain breaks through those barriers and I have ideas in those places that I don't think would have come to me otherwise. So yeah, actually, you're making me think of these others. There's a cave in San Diego called Sunny Jim's Cave. And it is again, if you ever want to visit, sort of like a real life dungeon, it's like 15 or 20 stories tall. It's the cave starts at at sea level. And then it winds up this extremely long staircase, like probably, I don't know, 10, 15 stories to this entrance at the top of a cliff. And it was carved by a smuggler who wanted to smuggle alcohol when that was illegal in America. And like parts of it already existed. Then he like connected the caves to build the staircase. But it's crazy, it's like straight out of all these like sea adventure modules where there's like a lighthouse and this, and then the Kuatoa are invading from the sea or whatever. But yeah, places like that, when you see it for real, it makes you think about how much adventure can happen. Like you don't always need a really big sprawling dungeon. Sometimes you just need 5 or 6 rooms and that can be enough if they're really interesting locations.
Yeah. And something very cool. I image a place that's maybe inspired something weird, as you said, like this is hidden in here inside the stone, and then it makes you feel like how would the adventures feel from here, like going through like a forest and seeing these caves or even sometimes some ruins of old buildings that were there, like you imagine these sensations and descriptions you can talk about. I don't know. I love
Actually, so
going
yeah,
to
on that
forests.
note, there's one adventure I wrote a long time ago called The 13th Skull, and I was reading like a lot of Lovecraft and Mark Smith. But one of the
Mm-hmm.
secret doors, there's I think it's 7 coffins in a row. Um, but you just open the door to the coffin, and one of them, instead of having a coffin floor, it has a staircase going down inside the coffin. And I've always liked this idea because you're making me remember. I feel like that was inspired by Sunday Jim's Cave, but a lot of times you just mystery doesn't have to be. Well, first of all, it should not be dice checks. I always dislike the idea of rolling a d6 to see if you get a 5 or better, then you find the secret door. I'd rather the player say, "I lift
Yeah,
up the coffin lid," or I pull the
yeah.
lever, or I kick the wall to see if it's hollow. But that idea that you can have mystery even in the real world of just very simple stuff. Have you ever heard of the Winchester Mystery Mansion?
No.
It's in San
Winchester
Jose,
Mystery Mansion?
California. Yeah,
Hmm.
Michael Curtis is a huge fan of this place. We went years ago. This The Winchester is an American company that makes guns, and something like 50 or 100 years ago, the heir to the Winchester fortune, inherited a gazillion dollars and decided to spend all the money on this crazy house. So you can Google it, but the house has like 100 rooms, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And many of them make no sense. And there's like staircases that lead to nothing, that lead to empty walls. There's like half doors that are partially obscured by another wall. There's
It's a
windows that open to
dungeon.
nothing.
It's a
Yes, it's like a real life dungeon made by a crazy
yeah.
person. And there's all these like stories of ghost sightings there at night, and the ghosts of the uh, and you don't know how much of it's true and how much of it's fake, but if you tour it, you realize it's really crazy, and you can totally see
Yeah.
something weird happening there. And when you're there, even during daylight with a tour and like 30 people around you, you just start feeling weird and like your skin prickles because it's so strange, like no rational
Yeah.
human would build a place like this. So I think going to those places just makes you, it frees your mind, I think,
Wonder.
somehow.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah,
sees that reality is so strange that our fiction can go there too, right? Uh,
right.
there is
Yes.
very few things that strange as reality can be because there's a lot we don't know about, right? A lot we have to seek, like the crash, like the games, like these weird games that we play. We
Yeah.
if we can stay on the surface and just go to the same trails and play just D&D, but there's a lot of richness behind the surface, and and
Yeah.
and you're thinking about how people can see the depths more easily. It's a great thing. You talked about uh, rolling to find things, and I was just coming up with a rule from one of my games now that is basically saying you just roll dice to change the situation or to prevent the situation from changing. But if you want to find out more about it, just talk it out. Don't roll dice
Yeah.
to get more
Yeah.
information. Just see how you can get it in a diegetic way, just talking it out. But you want to
Yeah.
change or prevent it from changing, then you roll dice. You know?
I think that's a great
Yeah.
call. I think D&D is really different when you play with kids as opposed to crusty adults. All of us crusty adults who have done it too long, we know the tropes and we know the rules, and we say, okay, there must be a secret door here somewhere. But when you play with kids,
Yeah.
they have no idea what might be there. I don't know. It's just very different. So I've played several games with my middle school child and his friends, and it's really refreshing because they don't know what you can and can't do, so they just like do stuff,
Yeah.
and it's sometimes completely different from what any adult would have done.
Yeah. It's can be a lot of fun if they're more free. They can try a lot of stuff that others wouldn't do. Yeah, I love playing with kids.
Yeah.
Joseph, in the work that you do, I always ask people here now. It's kind of a new question, so not always. I've a few episodes, but can you identify any kind of maybe strength that you have that maybe helped you in your work, in your craft on Goodman Games?
A strength. Interesting. Hmm.
So if you are proud of doing maybe this sticknet twist, you just sit down and doing your work, or having this vision about how building a community for DCC. I don't know, this analytic eye of turning even the business side into a game, and seeing how you can take advantage of it. I don't know. Do you identify anything you say, oh yeah, I'm proud to have this, and use that to my advantage?
Yeah, I mean, we're all born the way we are, so some of it's always just genetics, and if you get lucky. And some of it's frankly you're born into a circumstance that lets you have you're able to go to a good school, or you're able to, have the resources to go to summer camp or something. And then of course there's the things that you actually do in your spare time. I mean, from a very young age, I like to design games. Like I found my dad is now quite old and we're selling his house and he moved to a nursing home. We found a bunch of the old games I designed when I was a kid. And they're all just copies of other games, but because that's what kids do is they copy and they learn. But my dad tells, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like tracing, and then that's how you learn how to draw a head or whatever.
Yeah.
But my dad told me stories about when he was a kid, how he used to make up games, with bottle caps and things from the 1950s. And now my 6-year-old actually last night made up a really simple game and he wanted me to play it. So I think some of it is I spent most of a huge chunk of my childhood making up games. Either it's board games. Later on, it was writing RPGs. For a long time, I was into miniatures games. So I would buy miniatures and write up rules for statistics for their weapons and so on. And so I'd say if there's one thing that helped me a lot, it was just spending a lot of time doing that stuff, because you have to. It's like anything. Just the more you do, the better you get, and you have to do it for a long time before it becomes good enough that anybody really cares. So I say, just if you want to make games for a living, make games, and eventually you'll be able to do it for a living. But start out doing it just because you love it and see where it goes.
Yeah, that's great. So I think I would say was sticking with it, like being willing to try it and play with it and having this passion and taking this. I love some of the creative book that says to approach the work like a kid and finding out what you can do and not to do. So you spend a lot of time, when you're running, just experiments, playing with it and finding out what would work and not work. And then do you see yourself continue to do this, even not having a time now, being a dad and doing all the stuff? Do you sometimes see yourself maybe making notes or thinking about stuff in your head about games or no?
Yeah, I sort of so honestly, right, so my whole life I've gone through many different phases of what kind of games I play and what I love. Obviously there's a long D&D phase, there's a long Warhammer 40,000 phase, there was a board game phase, like whenever this was 15 years ago, so right now board games are huge. There was this era where Euro board games were suddenly really hot. So right before that era, when like Carcassonne and Puerto Rico and a few other sort of Ticket to Ride had like just sort of hit the US scene, this would have been like 15, 16 years ago. I got really into those kinds of board games when I was first discovering them. And right now my personal interests are starting to drift back towards board games, because there's been, honestly, I haven't paid attention to the board game field for like 10 or 15 years because I was busy with, DCC and raising kids and so on. And like, there's so many board games now and so many of them are so good, so part of my thinking has started to drift into like, they're so fascinating. The mechanics are so different from what I knew as a child and what even I knew 15 years ago. Yeah. So part of my personal interest when I find a chance to hang out with other adults, and game, a lot of times now I try to try out a new board game. So I would say if my personal interest, if I do wind up with an extra 6 hours some week, it's probably going to be trying out a new board game or trying to persuade some of my friends to take a long lunch break and meet me and play some games during the day, something like that.
Awesome. You talk about Carcassonne. It's one of my favorite games because it's very simple to play, right? Just take a tile, put it there, and place it. But you have to play well. It really takes skill and attention. So I think that's a great example of game design. Try to make a game that's very easy to play, but you can explore and make it deep in other ways that goes after that. Like make it easy to sit down and play and offer depth in as you go further, right? Instead of maybe those games that you spend 3 hours making a character sheet that has all these skills.
Yes, exactly.
And stuff. Yeah.
It's funny you say that though, because I own Carcassonne. Then I bought like all the expansions. Again, this was like 15 years ago. I'm sure there's even more expansions now. And then I made the mistake of mixing them all together. So now it takes forever to set up because it's so freaking complicated because all the expansions are mixed. And I need to just buy a new set and leave it away from the rest, so I can get back to that. Because the original was so easy to play, because it was so simple. And when you mix in like whatever I had, 8 or 9 expansions, it gets really hard.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is the expansions, they have an icon marker. So maybe like you can say, hey kids, let's play a game. Let's find this This
It's
piece is
$5.
here.
Yeah, help Daddy sort 1,000 tiles.
Yeah. Wow, 1,000. So you bought really all of them, right? Because
I don't know how many. It's a lot, man. It's a lot.
Yeah. I just bought one of those big boxes that was the basic plus 6 expansions. It was enough. I would put 1 or 2 together. I did that mixing everything together with Munchkin, and now it's a nightmare. It's like this.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Really tall deck of Munchkin. Sometimes just pick up one part and say, hey, let's play this part. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes. Hello, wonderful weirdos. This is Diogo Nogueira again, and today I'd like to talk to you about one of my favorite games, a game that I created, and you know, if you listen to the podcast, I love dinosaurs, and it's called Primal Quest. It is a weird stone and sorcery adventure game. It's a NSR game, which is this game that caters to the old school style of play, but has more modern and more cinematic gameplay adapted to our modern sensibilities. It has adventure with dinosaurs, ancient civilizations, spirity, sorcery, aliens, elder gods, and much, much more. It's very pulpy. It has, a complete rule set, a mini hex crawl, an adventure introductory adventure. You can find it at Exalted Funeral, itch.io, Drive-Thru RPG, and your best local game store. And we're releasing more and more stuff for it, so stay tuned and play Primal Quest. So let's get back to the weird with our chat. And talking about the strength, one thing that I want to ask you maybe, do you find any kind of anything you want to work more at, you wanted to get better at, that you find would be kind of a weakness, something you would prefer to improve for your work for Goodman Games?
Yeah, good question. Let's see. I mean, I had a career in sort of corporate America, and so there's always this focus there, and well, it depends on the company, but some element of development and working on certain things. And so there's certain things in that corporate context that I could certainly name as development, but specifically to Goodman Games, I think. So we have zigzagged a lot in our product development. So the titles we release were often based on things that I'm interested in, and or other people on the team are interested in. But our interests are not always linear and not always the same as our fan base. So we would release products like actually Tales from the Magician's Skull, which is a fiction magazine that I published. We did with the 12th issues at the printer now, which I loved, and it's a lot of fun. But not everybody who's a gamer is necessarily also interested in sword and sorcery fiction. So I think we've published a lot of things that if you drew Venn diagrams of the fans, like there's an overlap portion for all of it, but it's not like one overlapping circle. It's a lot of circles. So what I'm trying to work on over the next year or two with my product development leads is really focusing more on, of all the things that our fans like and that we like and where those things intersect, what are the ones that everybody likes the most, that we like the most? And let's try to be more focused so that our fans can consistently say, oh, Goodman Games is doing this. Like we did Dark Tower. Now we're going to do Caverns of Thracia. Then after that, it's going to be X. Oh, we should. I totally want that. A little less zigzagging and more like threading the needle through the core of things that we all collectively like.
Yeah. That's hard. And how do you have any ideas how they're going to do that? Or are there going to be surveys or anything like this? Or is this the Appendix 2000 paying attention what people are into right now? Or yeah.
Yeah, good question. Part of it's just us talking and saying, like, did everybody who liked these things, are they also going to like these things? Or are we getting like I can't say what it is, but I own a license to something that I got because there's something I really like. And so I went out and pursued the license and I got the license to it. But I don't know how many other people like this thing. I know that I like it and a lot of my staff likes it, but it's pretty weird. And so like I'm deciding in my head, do I want to devote our time and energy to developing this content? Because I'd guarantee 25 or 50% of the Goodman Games fan base will love this. But that's not the same as 100% will love it. And so I'm trying to decide, should I stay focused on the thing? Like, everybody likes a good dungeon crawl. They don't necessarily like this other thing. So focus is hard. It's always... Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's like having different projects. I have different projects going on and deciding, okay, which one should I focus on finishing? Should it be something I'm more interested at or something that people are asking more about? It's And that enters a part of game designer and businessman, which is gonna be like which you're gonna follow your maybe creative passion, or you're gonna follow, oh no, then let's give it more what people want, and it's kind of more a sensible decision. And I don't know, maybe we'll
Right,
come up with a
exactly.
with a game
Yeah.
way to decide. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, Joseph, now we're past 1 hour of the podcast, and I would like to maybe ask a little bit more personal questions, maybe about your experiences, the way you do your things, the way you think, or stuff that you believe. And we've talked a lot about being, parents, being fathers, and having kids. And one thing I'd like to ask you is, do you try to make any effort to present the weird to your kids, to make them pay attention in weird stuff and different things?
Uh, yes, not in that way. I don't say, "Hey, this is weird. Let's check it out." But I
No,
I
yeah,
take
but
them
do you
on.
present the different stuff for them?
Yeah, I try to. So my younger son is only 6, and he loves pinball. If you ask him what do you like, he says pinball, and he can't even reach the flippers. We have to use a stool. But it's because I've taken him to so many pinball bars and arcade bars. And there's a show near me. Another random thing: if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, check out California Extreme. It's a vintage pinball and vintage arcade show. It's kind of like Gen Con for people who like pinball and arcades. But I've taken
Nice.
my kids there for several years in a row. So yeah, so a lot of my interests they wind up discovering because I take them to things that I like, and then they get exposed to it. Um, the other thing would I own a travel trailer that you tow behind your truck, and you can sleep in it. And we bought that several years ago. But I want them to grow up with a sense of exploration and wonder and wanted to see the world. And eventually you can do that internationally as well. But with young children, it's a lot easier to do it domestically. So we are planning a 4-week travel trailer trip for the summer. So I mean, America
Wow.
is huge, and America has an
Yeah,
amazing amount of things to offer. Yeah, it's incredible how many amazing things are in America. So we're gonna
it's
over the course.
many countries in one. Like this
Yes,
coast is completely different from that one, and in the middle, it's all over the place. So yeah.
yeah, and there's large mammals roaming America. There's large gazelles, and people go to Africa to see some of these things, and you can find bison right here in America. You can find giant moose that weigh 2,000 pounds. Like it's incredible. Um, so we're going to do a big travel trailer trip. We're going to see the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, um, Yellowstone, as well as a number of other smaller sites, probably Canyonlands and Arches in Utah, a number of other things along the way. Uh, and it'll be 4 weeks on the road, sleeping in the travel trailer. But I want my kids to realize how vast the world is and how many cool things there are to see.
Yeah,
And if you see a certain number on your own, you start looking to see what else is out there. Then you find the stuff you're interested in.
for sure.
But yeah, so I try to just expose them, in between driving to school and going to frisbee practice and going to swim class and stuff. Also give them a sense of what else is out there.
Yeah. Do you? I think a lot of what you're talking here about, I sense a lot of curiosity on you, not only in games, but the things you go out on hiking, the way you do business, the way you explore different possibilities, like the new Appendix 2000, which is something you're curious about, and you're seeing that in your kids, finding out the sense of discovery. But do you see where you got that from? Do you got that from your parents? Do you got that from a teacher? How how did you acquire this curiosity, this healthy curiosity, by the way?
Yeah, great question and good insight. Several people have told me over the years that I exhibit a lot of curiosity, and that does drive some of it. Um, I think in some ways my parents might have just been the right mix of interests and genes. My mom was very adventurous. She, among other things, she joined the Peace Corps and lived in Turkey for quite some time in her early 20s and taught English to Turkish children.
Nice.
And then later in her life, did a fair amount of traveling, including when she retired in her, I want to say 60s, she moved to China and then taught English again in China in her, at an age when most people were settling down. Um, and she had just a lot of adventures in her life. Whereas my dad was much more interested in intellectual exploration, and he was actually a professor for a while and later on left that career. But it's been a lot of he was just extremely well read, less about fiction and more about fact, nonfiction, but just well-educated and self-educated in many ways, and always loved sort of intellectual exploration. So somehow I got kind of the mix of those two things, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. You can sense this also the intellectual and also the travel thing, which is great for a creator, for someone that deals with creativity. I think it's how the full you can have, right? And it's very healthy. You're instilling that to your kids. It's something I'm always struggling, to pass on my kids. His school is on strike right now,
Oh
because it's a
no.
public school. It's a very good
Yeah.
school. I also think that the strike thing is also a teachable moment because you have to fight for
Yeah.
your rights, but getting him to do some exploration, intellectual exploration outside of school, it has been a struggle, and trying to teach him, and my wife tells him, no, you have to study because then you'll be able to find better jobs and stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's true, but it's not really about that. It's about understanding you better, understanding the world better, and understanding how things work, and being useful for the community you are, so you can be integrated. It's not only about finding a job, it's about
Yeah.
I don't know, growing, right? And I don't know how is your kids with this kind of very immediate pleasures they can have now, like Netflix, YouTube. Everything is so immediate, and it's so easy for them to not do something and just consume something that's very instant. Because when I was a kid, yeah, of course I watched TV, but we had cartoons from this time, and now I have to make up stuff, and nowadays they don't need to.
I mean, with my first son, I tried to imprint on him a lot of the things I liked. So he is more interested in Star Wars than my second child, because with my first son, I was really excited to watch Star Wars with him. And with my second son, I began accepting more that the world is very different now, and just as it was different from my father to me. And they're never going to like the same stuff. Star Wars, when I was a kid, was special because there was only one of them, and then later on 2 and 3. And there was nothing else like it. Nowadays, both my kids are like, Dad, there's so many Star Wars movies and shows. I don't even know where to begin. Like, it's very different for them. And so I now accept that they're growing up in a different world, and I can, like you use the word spirit, which I think is right on. I can instill the spirit with them without the specific things, and they're just going to have a different experience growing up, which is okay. So I try to exist more in their world. When I was a kid, it was all about Nintendo and Atari 2600, but nowadays it's all about Roblox. At least for my kids, they went through a Minecraft phase, now Roblox phase. Now when I'm kind of getting into Fortnite, and it's
same thing.
A big part of it is and the culture is important because all the other kids play a certain thing, and you want them to be able to share experiences with kids their age, because like their maturity level is so different. When my 12-year-old hangs out with his 12-year-old best friend, like they laugh at things that I think are just ridiculous. But their sense of humor is the 12-year-old sense of humor. So, to your point, I think that you can get there. I don't know. It's less about the specific thing, like not about Star Wars anymore for me, but more might be about Roblox. But you can still have the same sense of wonder or sense of excitement or sense of whatever. But it's funny your point about like learning for the value of learning and learning for the value of getting a job, because I mean, for my kids, a job is so far away and incomprehensible to them. They have chores they have to do. Like he's got my 6-year-old, we just assigned him his first chore. So my dad had a system when I was a kid. Every year on my birthday, I got a new chore, and then I also got a 25-cent raise in my allowance. It was very directly correlated with I got more work, but I also got more money. And so we're using the same system. So both my kids, my 6-year-old just got his first allowance, but each of them is now going to get a new chore, and a new raise in their allowance. So my 12-year-old, I think he gets $10 a week, if I remember right. And he has to set the table, clear the table, do his laundry, clean his room, take out the trash, some other stuff that I'm forgetting. But he has this whole list of chores that he has to do. Empty the dishwasher in the morning. And so that's teaching them that, money is correlated with work, which I think is valuable. But knowledge, and getting a job, that's so far in the future, it's incomprehensible to them,
Yeah. I'm just asking that because I'm having a hard time saying, you're out of school, but we have to continue studying. We have other, like we got him in a small course so he can practice math and English. He's starting to learn English.
Yeah.
Luckily, he can't listen to it well because he will learn the stuff that he does here. You're paying your kids to do, and I'm like yeah, well, we give him stuff like he doesn't have allowance yet, but we have to figure that out. But that's a good idea, like correlating this to work, and it's kind of back to what I said to him, like being useful in the community, and because we made him like do the dishes and stuff, and like no, kids can't work, kids don't work, and you're not working, you're taking care of your things, of your house,
exactly.
Of your family. We're here together and we're working together, taking care of each other. It's not work, you're just living, because when you have your house you have to do this, but yeah. But
kids want to be part of the family, and just telling them that like the family can't function unless everybody contributes. And we rely on you to contribute as well, and here's your contribution. Washing the dishes or whatever it is. Yeah.
And we say it gets easier for everybody. If everybody does a little bit, it gets easier for everybody. So he's getting into that. It was just the why I'm studying if my school is on strike was like, because it's good for you, and it's always this battle.
Well, I mean, I will say I was not very good at school. It was a double-edged sword. I'm smart, and so I was able to coast for a long time on being smart. Yeah. And then when I got to high school, I had to actually work, and I didn't like that because I wanted to spend my time playing games. And so I had good moments and I had bad moments in school, and I really did not like learn. I remember biology. I hated biology. I don't have a scientific mind. I did not enjoy certain subjects, and I would much rather be doing something else that I was interested in. And so there were plenty of times in school. Yeah. Yes, me too, actually. Like there were classes I did well in because I was interested in them, and it was very hard for me to work hard on subjects that didn't interest me. And that may be, I don't know what that is, but some people can study hard for every class. Other people have to have that inherent interest. So your son, maybe he's just like you. Find the part that he loves and maybe emphasize, with one of my sons, like he actually started coding in first grade using command blocks in Minecraft. But he's really interested in computers, and coding is very easy for him.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he hates other things. Yeah, maybe that's it. In Roblox, you can code. I want to say he did it on his iPad. In Minecraft, the command block stuff. But so we've learned like there's certain things that are not his bag. But if we emphasize the stuff he can really enjoy, that he just naturally wants to do that. Like your son must. What are the parts he loves? Is there an aspect of school that he loves?
Not really school, but he wants to make this part of add-ons and stuff like this for Minecraft and Roblox. Wants to explore that.
Yeah.
And we just got him an iPad. We're working on getting him a computer because all we have here is Macintosh, and the stuff we want to play with doesn't run on Macintosh. So we gotta have to buy a PC or something. Yeah.
So do you know about command blocks in Minecraft?
Yeah. I even I made a magic item for my RPG inspired on game on command blocks. Because imagine like this huge alien cube that has alien symbols on each face, and like it has been passed down from civilization to civilization, and like every civilization discover a different code that alters reality in a way, right? So
that's cool.
Adventures would be like venture to the world and find different codes, and one day they can find a cube. And maybe they put in a code like from Atlantis or something, and the sea levels begin to rise or something like this. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always try to do that. I play stuff with him and try to see what can I steal here from my stuff, But yeah.
I mean, I will say that I don't remember what book it was. There's some book we bought my son. I think he was in kindergarten. We actually might have bought it, and he read it in first grade. But it was like introductory coding with Minecraft command blocks. And you can do it on an iPad. You don't even need a PC. He did it on his iPad, I'm pretty sure, because I don't think we had a PC then. And that's what got him on because command blocks, it's simple, very simple coding. I mean, super simple, but it's enough for a young child, like an 8-year-old could probably grasp it. I think my son was 6 or 7 or 8 when he did this. Anyway, it might really get him interested, and that's what my son. Yeah. Now that's the part. There's parts of school he hates. That's the part he can do great with, So.
Yeah. We this new school, the public school, began with computer classes, so he's kind of interested into that, and that's what
great.
we're gonna try. I'm gonna sell my old Mac and buy him a PC soon. I hope.
Oh, that's great. Good dad. Like, that's great.
I got a new one, so I'm good.
Okay.
Just another thing we ask to here is about maybe a little bit about spirituality and religion, and maybe any kind of philosophy that you identify yourself with, and maybe helped you in the different times in your life, because we all have those tough moments, and sometimes we find help in some of these things. Do you have anything like this for you, any kind of religion, spirituality, or philosophy that helps you?
Uh, Not really. I'm not spiritual, but I do believe in being nice to people and just helping. So, and I've, you go through phases in life of being busier or not busier, but with my older son, we spent several years actively involved in the Cub Scouts. And one of the things I like about them, um, so first of all, Cub Scouts vary so much depending on the local, who's involved in the local group and how they express themselves. So some of them are very religious. The one I'm in California and it's not religious at all, but they still emphasize this aspect of, to help other people at all times. That's actually part of the Cub Scout motto. So, or to help others at all times, I believe is how it goes. So we did a lot of work with feeding hungry people, and a lot of stuff like also with picking up litter in nature and so on. But that's been something that my older son was raised on. We used to, on Thanksgiving, we would go deliver meals to needy people and stuff like that. So I think that kind of stuff's important, especially with kids. Like my parents made me deliver. I don't know. Have you ever heard of Meals on Wheels? It's a
Yes.
program.
Yes.
Yeah, so I had to do Meals on Wheels every year. I think it was on either Christmas or Thanksgiving growing up. And like I hated it as a kid. I wanted to play with my toys, but we said drive around and give food to old people, But like they
But
did
you
that for
learned
years.
something, yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, now I tell my kids we're gonna go give food to old people. So
And
I've
they want to
done
play with their toys, or are they into it?
um a little bit. So one of the activities we do with the Cub Scouts is actually you leave a leaflet on the door of everybody's house, and the leaflet says put food in a bag on your porch next Saturday, and then that next Saturday you come back and collect all the bags. And that's exciting because you can weigh the bags and try to beat the other kids. So they got into that part of like who collected 500 pounds of food, uh
Wow, yeah.
so that one they kind of got into mostly because they wanted to beat the other kids. um but
Yeah.
we've done different versions of different things.
Beat them with kindness, beat them with
Yes,
charity.
exactly.
Yes.
With them charity, yeah. Different versions of with coworkers or friends or Cub Scouts or just on our own. So that
Mm.
kind of stuff I think is important. And through Goodman Games, we've always given money to charities through various ways. So it's not so much spiritual, but my parents, without going into a lot of detail, I had an atypical upbringing. My parents had unusual jobs, and they really believed in the works of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. They were big advocates of sort of nonviolent protest and social change,
Mm-hmm.
and so I grew up with a lot of those sorts of values reinforced constantly. Um, so in everyday life, a
It's
lot of it's easy to get. We're all busy. We're all stressed out. It's easy to just not be as kind as
get
you should. So I
lost.
try to remind
Yeah,
myself to
yeah.
be kind.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any kind of practice or any kind of saying, anything that helps you remember that stuff? Uh, Me, for example, when something like bad happens, for example, I'm late somewhere and someone on the street closes me off or something, I
Yeah.
repeat that phrase and like, if I were him, I would be him, and I try to get into the mind that yeah, he's probably late for something, he's probably has a problem,
Yeah.
and then I am able to get out of this space. Do you have anything like this for you? Do you see yourself in getting, I don't know, getting out of this headspace and using something to get back, or no?
Great call. In the moment, I never remember this, but later on, what I try to say is assume positive intent, which somebody told me years ago. But most people have positive
Yeah.
intentions. Very few people start their day saying, "I'm going to screw somebody over." Like we all
Yes,
are.
yes.
We're trying to get to the office, or we're trying to get to our kids' play, and we're running late, so we're speeding, or whatever. Most people are trying to do something positive, and you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so I usually in the moment I'm angry, but later on I'm like, assume positive intent.
yeah.
Dude was probably just rush into. Actually, years ago, some lady rear-ended my car. Like there was no way she couldn't have seen my car. Like, it was one of those things, like, how could you possibly drive into my car, lady? Like, and she was rushing because her child was about to present his science project, and he had left his like science board at home, and so she was
Mm-hmm.
rushing to get there before his presentation. And she was just completely distracted, focused on getting to this presentation, and like slammed right into the back of my car, and because her mind was
Yeah.
completely elsewhere, you know. And again, her intentions were completely positive to help her child, and instead she managed to cause a
Yeah.
lot of damage to my car.
Yeah.
But I try to
Yeah.
assume positive intent when I can.
For sure. Yeah. She didn't was like, oh, I'm gonna run into that car. Of course,
Exactly. Yeah.
she didn't thought that. That's something I try to tell my kid too. He gets into these very angry moments when something goes wrong. Like they did this against me. I was like, no, we're all trying our best.
Yes.
It's sometimes our best isn't the best, but it's what we could give at that moment, and it's a good exercise to remember that.
That's well said.
Joseph,
I mean, well said. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Another thing that I ask here is maybe about weird experiences you might have had. Which I mean, like, have you ever had any experience with maybe near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences?
I saw a ghost in my childhood.
Oh
And for many
yeah,
years, I doubted my own experience until like 10 or 15 years later, my brother told me the story of how he saw a ghost, and it was the exact same ghost, the exact same place.
wow,
Um, yeah, we were in a state park or a national, some sort of like forest cabin. My parents would go to these cabins in the woods with their family friends. So it was the Hodges was one of those families we often went with, and there were some other families too. So it was one of these families where we visited the cabin with them, and you stay in like these. It's like this national park cabin or state park cabin. So you have like 2 or 3 bedrooms in a shared area. And I remember
yeah,
waking up in the middle of the night, um, and I guess there were 2 beds. There must have been like me and my brother in one bed, my parents in the other. But I remember waking up in this cabin in the woods in the middle of the night and seeing a man standing at the end of the bed, and he had a very long beard, like a very long scraggly beard. He looked like a mountain man, and he
mm-hmm.
was turned to the side, like looking out the window, so sort of 90-degree angle to my bed. And I remember saying something like, I don't remember what I said, but saying something to him, and he didn't respond in any way. He just stood there staring out the window, and then I got completely freaked out and dived into the covers and like hid, and then eventually fell back asleep. So I didn't tell anybody. And then many, many years later, somehow my brother started telling the story about how he saw a ghost, and he told the exact same story. Like, he had also woken up that night in the same cabin and seen the same thing. And that was
Wow,
the point where I first told anybody about what I'd seen. And we apparently saw the same strange figure at the foot of the bed, and it could also have been a human who broke into the house or something, but there was
yeah,
no evidence of that. And he just stood
okay,
there at the foot of the bed staring out the window. So that's all I know. I never researched. I don't even remember what cabin it was. I never researched the history. Maybe there was a murder there years before. I don't know. But I
but
do
still think
think I
about it,
saw
right?
something unusual. Yeah, and I can't explain it. And it was really weird that my brother corroborated the exact same story and the exact same
Yeah,
experience at the same place.
yeah, yeah. We talked about really spirituality and how ghosts, but I didn't ask you. Do you believe in God in any way, even not necessarily this benevolent thing, but do you believe in this in a supernatural creation force or anything like this?
Yeah, I think there's some sort of God. I was raised by parents who were, my parents changed religions several times when I was growing up. They made me go to church once a month or twice a month. I forget. There was some rule. I had to go to church. So I was exposed to church and went to church, and never connected with it, and just have not connected with it. However, I, you know, there's a lot of evidence that Jesus existed and did amazing things. Like, there's so much in the historical record about certain things having occurred. So I do believe that some of what we consider to be miracles did really occur. Maybe it's been distorted over the years. I'm sure the story has changed, but there's certainly uh, evidence of amazing things having happened in the history of humanity. Um, and there's plenty of unexplained phenomenon that happen to this day. I think there's a lot of fakes. There's a lot of people trying to make money off of it. And so
Yeah.
I don't have a huge appreciation for organized religion, but yeah, I think there's some sort of God, some sort of greater force. We've all felt it at times of need. And during both my kids had trouble at birth and wound up in the NICU, like the neonatal intensive care unit.
Mm-hmm.
My older son was in there for 2 weeks, and my younger son was in there for 1 week. And that was the most trying time of my life. Each of those experiences.
Yeah.
There's definitely a moment in time when you hope there's something else out there because you want somebody to help you when nothing else looks like it's going to happen. So I think we all feel a need in our lives at some time so we sure hope there's a higher power because we want somebody to help us. And there's a time when you do reach out to whatever's out there that you feel like you have to. So yeah, I think there's some sort of God. That's about all I can say.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And I'm great you find comfort in that and you were able to find that and it helped you in the moment you had the need. And something else I ask here, it's okay if you don't want to answer, but it's about maybe if you have any experience with altered states of awareness, whether it is with deep meditation or with any use of psychedelics or anything. And if you did, if you want to talk a little bit about it, if it changed in any way you see things.
Short answer is no, I don't have a lot of experience with that. My dad was always really into meditating. He meditated like in the 1980s when nobody meditated,
Mm-hmm.
He also was recycling in the like late 70s, early 80s. When I was a kid, me and my brother had to go stomp aluminum cans with him to flatten them all. And then we drove them to like the other side of town to this recycling facility. And my dad would let us keep the money, because they pay like 5 cents a pound or something for cans.
Yeah.
So we'd always come back with like $4 in quarters. But my dad was very ahead of the times on a lot of things. He was doing a lot of things in like the 70s and 80s that became popular like 10 or 20 years later in the modern mainstream world. So he has been meditating and doing variations on that for decades. I can't meditate. When I try, my brain just never stops buzzing. I have a hard time entering a still state. And so specific to your question about, altered sort of mental states or altered consciousness.
Yeah.
No, but for my whole life, there've been moments in time where I feel almost like a buzzing or pressure in my head, and I just have to write or have to draw. It's like a creative urge or spirit, and if I don't do it, it eventually will go away. But like I can identify this, like, I don't know what it is, feeling that I just know there's a lot of creativity waiting to come out. And if I can get to a computer or a typewriter or a easel in time, I'm not known as an artist, but my first 20 years of my life, I drew nonstop and took nonstop art classes. Like I've always drawn I don't anymore, but there was a time when I thought I'd be an artist for my career, and I was pretty good for a while there. So, but yeah, there's definitely I don't know what it means in terms of brain chemistry, but there's moments in time where I can feel that there's something in my head is about to come out that's really good.
There. Yeah.
If I can get, you'll find a chance to express it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of books about art and creativity that talks about how creativity is kind of an antenna for these ideas that are out there, like this collective consciousness. And sometimes it can come to you, and if you're paying attention, you get this feeling. It's like this buzz, and you get to write. But sometimes you can, like you're busy with something else, and it will die on you, but it will resurface maybe somewhere else, somewhere else that paid attention to this buzz and this kind of collective consciousness. I don't know how true is that, but it's interesting to see sometimes games come up in our RPG space. Different indie games come up with similar, not the same mechanics, but similar ways to deal with a problem, the ways to think about something. For example, The Time of Fate, there's a bunch of games that try to deal with this more narrative ways of not having very numerical stats than the with dice. Like Fate and Cortex Plus have kind of this similar way of dealing with stuff, philosophy, but they deal with in different ways. And I see that in other games. Like when I did Primal Quest, there was 2 or 3 other prehistoric games that came at the same time. There's always, these things are coming in the collective consciousness, and what you talked about, the buzz, made me think about that. So, yeah.
Yeah. On that note, I mean, there's this old saying, "You are what you eat," and I think it's true with creativity as well. What you consume influences what you output. So for many years, I deliberately avoided any modern influences. Like when I was working on DCC RPG, I didn't go see movies. I didn't read modern books. I didn't watch modern TV shows. Like the only
Yeah.
thing I ate was vintage Appendix N fiction. And I think that's part of the reason why DCC RPG came out the way it was, because I had no other influences. So in the
Yeah.
times when I've wanted to create something in a certain way, I control my input of sources, and don't go see movies, don't go watch TV shows, don't watch
Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah.
Right now I'm not in that phase, but to your point, like I think a lot of the collective consciousness comes from people experience. If
Yeah.
you choose what you experience, you step out of that
You're
collective
part of
consciousness because you're not.
you are part of
Yeah,
that collective conscience too, in a way, right? Because there's
yeah, and
probably
then
other people that are doing the same thing as you, looking at older
yeah,
stuff, right?
they
Yeah.
all went to see Terminator when the new one came out or whatever. There's my mom when I was a kid. I was always creating stuff as a kid, and my mom was always telling me to get it published. She always wanted me to like go out and do something with it.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
but she would tell me, don't look at what other people do. So for many years, I made a point of never looking at what other people had done. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of even now. I often have very little awareness. You probably know a lot more about a lot of RPGs than I do, because I make a point of not necessarily paying close attention to what other people are doing,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to do what is special and unique to Goodman Games and to be in my team, and I don't want it to be influenced by them, and I don't want it to be reflective of other people. So there are times when I make a point of just turning off. Now I kind of monitor the marketplace, what's happening in the marketplace, but not necessarily the
Yeah.
specific contents of the products.
Yeah, not necessarily the content, maybe the way they present it, maybe they're selling it, maybe what you said about layout. There's always stuff you can learn from. Like you don't have to copy the contents of but
Yeah,
their approach to it, their approach to design information. Uh, at least that's what I see. Like the stuff that I'm making is always influenced by the stuff I'm consuming right now. But sometimes the way they organize the book, the way you know I'm writing a game that has a lot of comedy, so I'm consuming a lot of Terry Pratchett. It's something
yeah,
that I
yeah,
love. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So and now we are an hour and 40 something minutes. I want to get into more the quick and whimsical questions so we can finish this in a high and kind of a positive note. So I will
Okay.
begin asking you: do you dream a lot? Do you remember your dreams or no?
I do dream a lot. I very rarely remember them.
Okay, but when you do you try to take notes of them or anything? Or if you could,
No.
let's say this: if you could choose what you dream about, what would you choose to dream about?
I have no idea. Um, I usually just try to go to sleep because I'm usually really tired, and I know one of my
I
kids is
just
going
want
to
to
wake me up
rest.
really early. Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Uh, and if you could live in any fictional world or universe, what would you choose to live, and who would you be in that world? And that can be like a game, or it can be a movie from literature. Any sort of fictional universe.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been attracted to this idea of restarting civilization, or being in a so idealistic utopian ideals of creating a great civilization, but having a chance to do it from scratch. And this idea of I always was, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote the American Stories of Traveling West, Little House on the Prairie. That whole American dream of traveling west and settling the frontier has always been very attractive to me, whether it's settling Mars or settling the moon or settling the American West. So there's a book I read when I was a teenager called Earth Abides by George R. Stewart. You ever heard of this?
Mm, no.
It's in like its millionth printing. It just keeps on chugging. It's one of those it's not quite sci-fi. It's basically about a I'm about to say this, and because of COVID, it's now going to sound terrible. But this book was written in like the 1950s. It's about a virus that wipes out all of humanity. And again, this was written in like the 1950s. And a very small
Mm-hmm.
number of people survive due to weird circumstances or genetic quirks or things like that. And then it's three parts about this man who survives. Part A is just him trying to survive. Part B is when he finally finds some other people and starts a small family. And part C is like 20 years later when that family has become a community and there's now like 500 people, and it's about he's now 90 years old and this sort of the community living on or the society living on. It's so well written. It's such a wonderful book. And it's, could call it post-apocalyptic, but it's not even that. It's not even science fiction. It's just fiction, because the only thing that happens
Mm-hmm.
is a virus, and everything else is just people trying to survive in this world that is perfectly preserved, because all the humans just fell over dead within 24 hours. There was no nuclear war. There was no destruction.
Wow.
Um, it's a great book. So I think if I had to live anywhere, it would be in that book, because it's a great book and a great story of sort of humans sort of recreating a civilization.
Yeah, that's a very different answer. But who would you be in that world? Would you be just yourself, or would you be some kind of explorer? Maybe you're trying to recover something that was lost.
Great question. It's funny. The book has a character named Joey, which was my childhood nickname. It's actually like one of the later characters. So I think when I read it as a kid, that was probably part of the reason why I was interested in it. I can't even remember the name of the main character, but whoever the main character is, he's the character that I always was interested in the most. He's like
Yeah.
he was living in the woods doing some sort of research for his like PhD program or something. He's like a biologist or something, and then he gets bit by a snake, and the snake bite apparently makes him immune to the virus. And he later discovers one or two other people who had snake bites, and they also weren't affected by the virus. So he almost died from the snake bite, but when he comes out of this, he wanders into town trying to get medicine, and like everybody's dead, and that's when he discovered he's the last person in the world, or so he thinks. But that character I've always found to be a great character.
Yeah, great. And now the other way around, if you could get anything from these weird fictional worlds and bring it to our own world here, what would you make real here? And that can be a location, an object, a power source, an entity, a faction, anything like this.
Yeah, I guess I'm pretty practical. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how I could change the world. I guess if I could pull in one thing, it would be an external threat to the world. Because I think that people tend to bond together when they're given an external threat. I've seen so many examples of this in my day-to-day life, even working in offices where people will find all sorts of reasons to disagree with each other. Then as soon as they're like, there's an external threat in the sense that like there's going to be layoffs or something, then suddenly you all bond together, and you find that you don't have a reason to dislike each other. I think there's so many divisions in the world right now, and I wish there weren't. And the only thing that would cure that would be a good alien invasion. Like if if the aliens appeared tomorrow and like, Homo sapiens, we're going to do you in, then suddenly we would all realize we're not that different, after all, when you compare it to the guys who have tentacles and 4 eyes. So I think that's what I'd wish for. Something that would make us all realize that we have a lot more in common as humans than differences as humans.
I wish you didn't have to go there, but I mean, I think we're running out of options. I think.
Right. All that's left is the alien invasion.
Another thing, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose to have, and what would be the first thing you would do with that?
Oh man, I mean, it's easy to say, like wishes. Was it Green Lantern? I think who could make his lantern do whatever he wanted, but that just always causes problems, unanticipated consequences. Anybody who's ever been a dungeon master knows how to twist the wording on a wish. What would I be? I mean, I'd want it to be something that would benefit a lot more people than just me. And most of those superpowers are like, flying, or it's just about what you could do. Somebody who could do a lot.
You can come up with something. Yeah, I don't know.
You know what? Well, in the X-Men, Professor X did a lot, for mutants and later for humanity. And his power was only, what was it, telepathy and a little bit of telekinesis. But it was the way he sort of led the group that made the difference. And then later on, have you been reading the new X-Men comics?
No.
Oh, anyway, they were on a good run a couple of years ago. Then they got a new writer. Now it's not so good. But the whole Krakoa storyline where they basically created a mutant nation on an island, and then later on terraform Mars to be a mutant planet. But a lot of that was led by a handful of people in the X-Men whose power was not so much their power, but their ability to lead, which was like Storm and Cyclops and Professor X.
Yeah.
So I think I always learned from him,
right?
Yeah, and I think of those characters as being like, you can shoot laser beams with your eyes, or you can make a hurricane, but it's more about the fact that they're able to sort of bind together other people and get them to move in the right direction and get them to do good things as a large group. So I'd say if I could have one superpower, it'd be something along the lines of those superpowers, which was less about their power and more about their ability to use it to lead
Yeah.
and lead in a
I don't know
positive
if
manner.
that's a superpower though. Maybe that's just the the skill of, I don't know, the charisma. Is that a superpower? I don't know. But yeah, if that could be a superpower, to be able to unite people in a good way, like to effectively make them stay connected to each other, right? It's not just about follow me. It's about we are all here together, and if we work together, it will be better for everyone, in a way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And the last question I have for you, Joseph, is: do you remember the last time you felt really happy? Just grateful for being here and being alive. And if you do, can you share us what is that you were doing and how things went?
Yeah. I mean, I think with my immediate family, with my kids and my wife, there's a lot of kids are great because they're so disconcerted with, they often have no worries at all. It's easy as an adult. You're always worried about something, or whether it's, paying your rent, or, I got to do this chore. I got to make sure I get groceries for tonight. It's little things or big things, but there's in my experience, there's like always something on your mind about what you have to do next. I have a hard time
Yeah.
experiencing the present sometimes because there's always something else I have to do to make it through the day or make it through the week or make it through the month. Whereas my kids can very happily stomp in a puddle for like 30 minutes, And so
Yeah.
I was actually, I have a phone that like pops up memories, and it just popped up memories yesterday of I just have so many fond memories of being with my kids and them being so unconcerned with the world. So it popped up memories of both my kids actually love stomping in puddles. And I live in California, and it doesn't rain a lot here. We have like a rainy season and a dry season. And the dry season is like 10
Mm-hmm.
months long. Then there's like 2 months of rain, usually around like January, February, March. And so I have so many fun experiences of just going out, and they put on their rain boots and they just splash in puddles for like 30 minutes and have a blast. And often if my wife is there,
Yeah.
she's with us just hanging out while they splash in puddles. And there's no sense of time, no sense of worry, no sense of pressure. And then other related things, going on vacation trips with them to simple places like the beach or the creek, and they can have a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, we went camping a couple weeks ago, which was a ton of fun. Just a local campsite, and just did simple stuff like roasting marshmallows, playing
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
fire. Like it's fun to light a campfire, and the kids love like throwing little twigs in it and watching them burn. So I'd say just a lot of the time I spent with my kids and my wife is often one of the
Yeah.
few moments in time that I have where I'm not thinking about the next thing or worried about what I have to do that day, but I can sort of lose myself for a moment in their world of simple pleasures.
Yeah. And do you actually consciously stop to appreciate these moments at that time, or what I mean is, like, do you have any kind of practice to internalize those moments? Because it's sometimes it's very we instinctively internalize the bad stuff, right? Because it's the stuff we have to worry about, and sometimes we have to consciously internalize this other good stuff to kind of balance. My question is, do you have any practice to stop and do that sometimes, like in your daily life?
No, not at all. Maybe I should, but no.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't. I probably should be more reflective and stop to internalize that stuff. But no, I don't. But it's nice for me sometimes to enter a state where I'm focused on the present, and then 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh, wow. I didn't even think about that next Kickstarter. I need to work on the next Kickstarter or finish up this project for this distributor. Like you realize 20 minutes later, I
Yeah.
wasn't thinking about that at all. I just got lost in whatever we were doing. But no, I don't have a process
Yeah.
for it. I'll work on
Well,
that. That's a good idea.
but if you have this power to be mindful and be in the present, that's also very good too. Like, because what we have to worry about is when we are there, with our family and kids, and just worrying about something else. And then do you have this problem? Do you see yourself sometimes being there and not being there? Because I do, because
Yeah,
of anxiety sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a problem or just a sense of responsibility, but especially when you have kids, like the world is dangerous. Like parking lots are
Yeah.
full of cars. It's not like there's saber-toothed tigers trying to eat you, but like there's just hazards everywhere. So I feel like I'm constantly
Yeah.
being aware of the hazards and trying to keep my kids from like accidentally
Yeah.
stepping into traffic or whatever. I had to give my older son this whole talk, the whole like look both ways before you cross the street. He does that. but he doesn't stop. He walks right into traffic and then quickly swivels his head. And I was like, the part we left out was you need to stop and stand still and then look both ways. And then if there's nothing coming across the street. So, yeah, I think it's just a sense of being responsible and making sure that they grow up and, don't inadvertently do anything silly or stupid. We went camping. Speaking of fond memories, there were all these chipmunks at the campsite. So like humans leave out food and then all the animals discover that. So there's always animals that come into your campsite. And I've been to that campsite before and I know there's raccoons. If you sit very still at night long enough, you'll eventually see the raccoons come out looking for your food. And I always leave a very clean campsite because I don't want to feed the animals by accident. But these raccoons, these chipmunks, they're like little squirrels and they're super fast. And so like you turn your back for like 10 seconds and they're zipping out onto your picnic table, picking up crumbs, and you turn around and they're running away. So my kids set up a box to try to catch one. So they set up a box and like lean the box on a stick, and we're going to try to catch a chipmunk. And they spent like an hour trying to catch a chipmunk. And that, I don't have an hour to spend catching chipmunks. But during that moment, it was easy for me to forget everything because they were so into it. And it was hard not to also be excited about it,
That's great. Joseph, those were all the questions I had for you. I'm very thankful for being here and sharing all these stories, sharing, the things you learned, share about your life and this very wonderful and weird job as a parent that we have. So do you have any last messages to the wonderful weirdos out there that still listen to us?
Just be yourself. You do you, as somebody said to me once, because there are plenty of other people out there who have similar interests to you. You might be born in a place where you get to know them right away, or you might have to travel to meet them. But there's plenty of people like you out there somewhere.
Yeah, and only you can do you. So do you and do the best you can do. Can you take us out saying the catchphrase of the show? Keep it weird, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Diogo, for having me on the show. It's been a great pleasure. And keep it weird, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.